tried to fully at one time and less over time, is that they're in a position of sitting on the revolution, upholding it, and that this has gotten to be less and less affirming for people because of material conditions, you know, especially that they read about people having so much stuff everywhere else, you know, America especially, but that people are so enriched in places. Anyway, I think that people everywhere that have been exposed in one way or another to elements of human struggle towards in the socialist direction have been deferred, distracted from doing that because of the challenges, the material actually challenges that say, well, we can have a little bit of capitalism or profit system at the same time as we're working for socialism. Anyway, that they're trying to get along in both worlds, and that it's just taking time and persistence, as you probably agree to some degree, of sitting on the revolution, that we don't give up, that people don't give up the goals that we have in mind, and the extreme goals. You know, there are people that I work with and things that don't get what I'm talking about, because it's my views are so extreme by comparison to their ameliorated work that they're doing. You know, people want peace. Well, that's not the point. Peace. The point is that we're working for everybody to have a good life, materially speaking. Well, I hope that point was clear. I'm not becoming less and less a good speaker lately. But anyway, I have a question about this arms to Vietnam. I'd like to have somebody explain it to me about at some time. That it was said to be the wrong thing that Russia gave arms to.
Chinese said it was.
That's it. Oh, okay. Well, maybe that helps it. And this other question about military discipline, I have no idea what military discipline is in context of what you were talking about.
Me?
Yeah.
Military discipline. I don't remember saying military discipline. I was trying to.
Okay, well.
I can tell you what I was trying to.
Okay.
I was listening to what Al was saying, and I kept hearing concepts like military doctrine, and that it's connected to foreign policy, you know.
Okay.
And so I try to understand U.S. foreign policy and what it's doing in various countries, various parts of the world. So I think Al's way of looking at things is very helpful. And I mean, for me it is. So like, it seems like in the U.S. it used to be, I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know if this is one or not. But when I was a kid growing up, when you thought of war, the goal was to win, to just outright, do away with the enemy and have a government that the U.S. likes, right? And now it seems that, maybe we're not so concerned with outright winning everywhere. And so if we're not really going for completely winning everywhere.
Okay, I get it.
Right.
Thanks.
So,
yeah.
And that seems related to changing forms of warfare.
Right.
Right?
Good.
I mean, like cyber warfare and sending in certain special operation units. I mean, it's just drones. So it's like how we're going about war now must reflect our aims, which are changing.
Yeah.
So I just,
Yes, it's a good point to interject at that. Yeah. Thanks.
Can I have a quick follow-up on Raj's? I just wanted to say, I think that if the Soviet Union had not supported Vietnam, in the way that it did, and had not supported the liberation struggles in Africa, had not intervened in Afghanistan, its demise would have been sooner. Because what they were engaged in was not just an economic struggle. They were engaged in what was really fundamentally a global class struggle between two camps in the world. And particularly if you take Afghanistan, what brought about the Afghan revolution was was triggered by an attempt by the U.S. to bring in a new regime. They had top officials had just come back. They wanted to turn Afghanistan into a new base against the Soviet Union, I believe. I believe that's what happened. And so there was a revolution that was a bit premature, you could say, based on and it was a military revolution. But then what was the Soviet Union supposed to do? Then you're presented with the question of, that might not have been what your agenda was in 1977, but now you have a new reality in 1978 or 1979, and losing there now, is another piece in that global struggle that's going on. Just as if they lost Cuba, they lost in Cuba, if they lost in Vietnam, if they lost in Angola, taking all of those together. And the doctrine of Shevardnadze and Gorbachev was universal human values in place of class struggle, really. That was what they were saying. I remember the New York Times op-ed in, I think, 1987, which shows people on an island waving goodbye to the Soviet, a cartoon of Soviet ships leaving. And that was their idea. Their idea was we could conciliate with the imperialists instead of struggling with them. And that conciliationist view, which I think a large part of the communists in the military very much rejected as an idea, but the social democrats, the reformists, and the corrupted elements, that was okay. They felt, okay, we'll continue to do well, and probably the Soviet Union won't collapse. No one really saw the collapse coming at a time. But I think that conciliation, even if it had a short-term economic benefit to the Soviet Union, would have meant its demise. And in fact, conciliationism did mean its demise.
Could we get Charles's comment before we end? It's 12:30, and I hate to have him cut off.
What?
Charles had his hand up, and it's time to.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I don't know if he's done.
Let me just comment on your comment.
They're going to cut you off from. Why don't you get his
Norma, if you ask him to speak,
It's a simple comment, 2 words. I agree, and I thought that's what I was trying to say in my paper.
That may have been what I missed when I was outside.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. When you were talking and I was having various thoughts about the things you were saying in the situation in the then Soviet Union. One of the thoughts was, as you were talking about the bureaucracy and the structure, I thought immediately of Animal Farm, because it certainly seemed Animal Farm reflected exactly what you were describing, in my opinion at least. The other thing was that I read Gorbachev's first book, Perestroika, and in there he talked about we're not meeting the needs of the people, and I was thinking that the biggest export that the United States has is entertainment. It's the biggest in the world, and I think it's the most expensive one that we send out. And when you have people, young people that maybe aren't Marxist-Leninists, they're just young people, and they want to have fun and stuff like that, and you're getting bombarded with what we've got over here, and it looks great on the screen and in the music and stuff like that. It weakens the culture, and or I should say, if it were Marxist-Leninist, it would weaken it, because you want a piece of the action in that. I also thought about Robin Williams' film, since he's just recently passed away, Moscow on the Hudson, in which he plays a Russian immigrant. And the whole thing of the film, this is a comedy, of course, was he wanted to get a pair of Levi's. That's what he thought was so great about America, which I thought the premise was unbelievably stupid. But nevertheless, that was the premise of the film. And the other thing is that I've read that you could go and get anything if you took Levi's over to Russia. They were so valuable, which makes sense. And I'll say one more thing. The entertainment thing that we send overseas in that is a double-edged sword, because it creates here an expectation of getting something, and you want it, and we've got a whole class of people who can't have those things. In Russia, they think they can get it if they follow in our footsteps. But here, you got like Ferguson, all the working class in that, they're bombarded also with the very same propaganda, and it's for stuff that they will never have. So they will be discontented. At some point, that could lead to a revolutionary overthrow of the government. My hope. That's all.
Who kicks us out at 12 feet?
So Gene does, but what I was actually saying was not that a socialist contradiction with imperialism can ever stop. You know, as long as there is the two, only one will survive, and that life and death struggle. Question is when you are able to, when you have to bide your time. That's an important thing. And I thought Zbigniew Brzezinski's thesis was to drag the Soviet Union into Afghanistan and destroy it by that process of like the Americans were destroyed in Vietnam, except American empire is so large and so at that time full of resources. Even then, you know, its effect today is tied to Vietnam War, is similar things. That's what I was saying. I mean, in Second World War, Soviet Union ideologically, economically was cohesive, relatively speaking. And they faced the threat with tremendous cost, but they defeated it. So why couldn't they do it in Afghanistan? That was, you know, clearly a decay had occurred. I mean, you have described the decay. And the process of decay I'm not saying it's all to do with any of the leaders or Stalin at all. I defend Stalin, actually. I'm more for than anybody else on that. But I was trying to understand what are the factors leading up to. I know your talk is focused on military, so I'm not putting the onus on you. I just wanted your opinion or others' opinion. But I think you're right. You know, the struggle is worldwide struggle. We are in a period of deep retreat in socialism.
I will make to kind of like circle back into the military question on Afghanistan. I've read a lot of the material that put out by Soviet military Marxist-Leninists. And it all seems to me like it's pretty, how shall I say, pretty accurate. What surprised me the most was the practice rather than the theory. I mean, if you read Soviet ML stuff relating to the military, you know, they say, well, we have to judge every situation concretely. I remember they'll quote Lenin a whole bunch of times, concrete analysis of the concrete situation. Okay, so you gear stuff around what you're specifically facing. Okay? They went into Afghanistan based upon the military doctrine of fighting a war in Europe. Okay, they were not fighting an asymmetrical war. They were not fighting a guerrilla war. They're not fighting a, quote, counterinsurgency war. But they went in as if they were fighting the armies of NATO. Okay? And that struck me. I said, gee, this is contradictory to what their ML teaching is. And then I even had questions about, and I agreed with Gorbachev's policy of sufficient defense. Okay? I don't believe in that you should have a nuclear arms race. Okay? But what struck me and what came out among the military reformers after 85 was their conception of a war in Europe. I mean, all the major cities in Europe would be nuked. You'd have tactical nuclear weapons that you would use on the battlefield. Okay? And you would drive your tanks and troops through all this radiated, right, this radiated environment, right? And somehow you expect, your troops are going to survive. What are you conquering? Or what are you, counter attacking after your attack, right? Attacking a wasteland. And I didn't understand that, given the, their whole Marxist-Leninist analysis of military affairs. And so, just to go back to the Afghan thing, the reason why the paratroopers and the airborne assault troops were more effective was because they were trained to fight counterinsurgencies. Right? And so, but they were only about 4 or 5% of all the Soviet troops in Afghanistan. All the rest were trained to fight in the plains of Europe. In a totally two different situations. And when I would say theory and practice were really divided, but then theory and practice are divided in many ways, and it's just the problem in this case is that when theory and practice are divided in certain key areas, it can really have a negative effect. No.
When was that thinking dominant about the approach to war in Europe? What happened?
That evolved, I would say, during the Khrushchev period.